Let me give y'all a little bit of context. I'm going to be a fisheries biologist today, and y'all are going to be a Chamber of Commerce for the Great Lakes region. All right. Today I want to give you an update on an invasion that's 40 years in the making. These aliens are big, they're mean, and they're spreading like wildfire. So what am I talking about? None other than the Asian carp. Now these fish join an illustrious list of other invasive species that include Japanese kudzu, snakeheads, and zebra mussels. But for our purposes and in our area, the Asian carp is public enemy number one. And today I'd like to talk to you about why they're here. I'm going to talk to you about the impacts they're having on the economy and the environment, and I'm going to talk to you about what's currently being done to stop them. So let's get started. Why are these fish here? Well, I'll tell you a little story. In the 1970s, there was a gentleman named Jim Malone. Jim Malone's a good old southern boy. He's a catfish farmer from southern Arkansas. And Jim had a problem. Jim's problem was he didn't know how to deal with the algae buildup in his farm ponds. So like any smart guy does, he does his homework. And he finds out about these fish over in Asia that are really good at eating algae. So he decides to bring them over and puts them in his pond, and the results are fantastic. And like most things in a commercial business, anything that works doesn't stay secret for very long. So other commercial farmers in the area start to implement these fish, and it takes off. I mean, it becomes a huge success. Arkansas Game and Fish starts to experiment with them, starts to use them for sewage treatment and things like that. So everything sounds good, right? We're good. So in the 1980s and 1990s, the Mississippi River experienced a series of floods. These farm ponds became flooded, and guess what? These fish got out, okay? And no one thought it was that big of a deal at the time, but they were wrong. And it's worth mentioning, they also had a little help getting out. Arkansas Game and Fish, in their infinite wisdom, thought that the baby versions of these fish would be really good to stock in the rivers for live bait. They had no idea because they didn't do their homework. What they didn't count on were the impacts that these fish would have. So let's talk about that. First, we have the environmental impact. According to the National Park Service, these fish can eat up to 40% of their body weight per day. Now let's put that into a little bit of perspective here. These fish are about 5.5 feet long, so that table, essentially, and can weigh up to 150 pounds. All right, now let's think about this. They also spread like wildfire. These fish will spawn 3 and 4 times in a year, and they can lay up to hundreds of thousands of eggs at a time. So we're talking about a total fish population in the tens of millions up and down the Mississippi River, one of our main sources of commerce. Now, these fish are spreading like wildfire. They're also having a bad effect on the economy financially. Let's look at this. So in the Great Lakes region, ground zero, the area we're most concerned about right now, the commercial fishing industry is $7 billion a year. $7 billion, that's no joke. And the problem that we're going to see is when these fish get into the Great Lakes and spread is the outcompeting of native species. They will out-eat everything else in the entire region. In fact, when these fish get in a certain area, they can make up between 60 and 80% of the entire biomass. That's a lot of fish, everyone. And on top of that, these fish are also very dangerous to people. They have a certain quirky attitude, and they're a little sensitive. They're a little sensitive to vibration. I'm sure all of y'all have seen the YouTube videos of these fish jumping out of the water and people doing, shooting them with bows and stuff. And it looks like fun, but it's not. People are actually getting hurt. These fish, think about it, these fish are huge. And when thousands of them are jumping at one time, people can get very seriously injured. Thankfully, no fatalities have occurred yet, but it's probably coming down the line. Now, let's talk about how these fish, so we've talked about why they're here, we've talked about the impact that they're having. So now, what's being done to stop these fish? Well, unfortunately, nothing successful. We've tried electroshocking, we've tried aquatic fences, and we've tried building levees. Nothing is working to stop these fish, short of poisoning the entire waterway, which no one wants to do because then everybody loses. So this has actually come to create a new opportunity for some industrious fishermen like myself. when these fish are so high in numbers that they're easily harvested commercially with long lining of nets. So these fishermen are now taking advantage of commercially harvesting this fish and then exporting them. In fact, these fish are edible. They can be used for makeup, and they can be used for pet food. The market, it should be worth mentioning, the market for their edibility here is probably not going to take off anytime soon because these things are gross. But they're very, very popular in Asian cultures. So we have local fishermen now commercially harvesting these fish and exporting them to Asia. So in conclusion, we've learned why they're here, the problems that they cause, and what's being done about them. And hopefully someone can find a solution soon. And I hope that this has shed some light for you on the alien in our backyard.